talking about the Powerpuff Girls with Amanda Deibert and Kat Staggs. How are both of you today?
We're good.
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. It is a Saturday morning where I am, and it is a Friday night where you are. So
Correct.
I'm sorry for taking your time on a Friday night.
No problem. Good morning
Uh,
to you.
Good morning. Good evening to you. You are writing the
Mhm.
Powerpuff Girls Halloween Special for Dynamite Comics. Now, I
Correct.
have a question that I'd like to ask you, which is a question that I ask to everyone who shows up on my channel, which is one, why do you love comics? And I will follow that up with, why do you love the Powerpuff Girls?
Absolutely. So for me personally, I love comics because it's a collaborative medium. I love it for um the fact that, for me, I get to write something and then I get to pass it along to an artist, in this case, Kat, and see all the beautiful things that they create and see it come to life even more intensely than anything I imagined in my head. And there's just something so magical about the medium being, a mix of writing and visual art and it being something where you can like really see the acting and just the story on the page in a beautiful way. So for me, it's just such a fun medium that allows you to do literally anything. Um, so I love it. I always have since I was a little girl. And then the Powerpuff Girls specifically, I love because they're just awesome and fun. And I've loved them since I guess the 90s when they came out. So, and we also have a daughter who loves them. So that makes me love them even more. All right, your turn.
Uh, yeah, comics, I love being able to tell the story. Um, it's nice to do pinups every once in a while, but I enjoy doing all the guts. I love telling the story, and I love finding new ways to tell stories. And like she said, Powerpuff Girls, I am an OG Powerpuff Girl fan. I wear them on my body permanently. I've
Oh,
had,
really? All three of
yes,
them?
yes, all three of them. I have a tattoo of them that I got in the 90s. So
That's amazing.
I am OG Powerpuff Girls fan.
Is there a specific comic that made you realize that you wanted to make comics?
Um, yes, I was very young, I think 5 or 6, and I still have, it was one of the Power Records. It was a Batman 12-inch vinyl with the comic book attached to it. And I honestly don't know if the record still plays. I listened to it that much and it was Jose Luis Garcia Lopez did the art inside, and I
Amazing.
just fell in love.
Jose Luis Garcia
It's
Lopez,
one of
one of
my
the greatest of
absolute
all
favorite.
time.
Yeah, it's one of my absolute favorite comics ever.
What about you, Amanda?
I don't know if there was like one specific issue, but when I was a little girl, I would read a lot of the Archie comics. And it was like a weekly treat. I'd go to the grocery store with my mom and they would sell them there. And if I, behaved myself, I could get a new one. And so it was always something that I looked forward to. And I found it so fun. And I would read and reread the issues. And I think that's probably what made me fall in love with the medium as something that I wanted to do later.
That's pretty cool. Speaking of the Powerpuff Girls, you're talking about being an OG Powerpuff Girls fan. Did you have a specific episode or a specific moment where you absolutely fell in love with the show?
I should have looked this up because I cannot remember the name of the episode. But the episode, one of my favorite episodes is one where the I can't remember the name of the villain. She comes and she disguises herself and she makes the professor fall in love with her.
Sedusa?
Sedusa, yes, thank you.
Sedusa, yeah.
Couldn't think of it. And that episode is one of my favorites where she makes him fall in love with them and they're just like, no, she's crazy. And he's like, no, she's great. I love that episode.
What about you, Amanda? Is there a specific moment?
I don't know if there was a specific moment, but I always just really like the dynamic of them. And I'm one of three sisters. And so I think for me, I always kind of related to it being one of three sisters and seeing that dynamic. And so that was kind of fun for me. I'm the eldest, so I guess I'm kind of the blossom of my sisters and I. But yeah, so it was always something that I felt kind of related to, and they're just so fun. So it was
Yeah.
just like all of them watched. I don't know that there was a specific episode, but I love the Powerpuff
You know, I can
Girls.
relate. The Powerpuff Girls came out when I was in high school, when it was not cool for boys to be watching the Powerpuff Girls. But I'm
Mhm.
like, how can you not love
Right,
it when Bubbles thinks she's Mojo Jojo
right,
Right.
right. Exactly,
and starts
exactly.
monologuing like him?
Oh my
That's
God.
it's I always thought it was an amazing show. Um,
So
did you
fun.
have a did you so for the Halloween special specifically,
Mhm.
how are you approaching this particular comic?
So the fun that I had was I decided because I was like, oh, it's Halloween and it's Powerpuff Girls and I want to do all the things. And so the concept is that Buttercup is trying to write a horror comic throughout the comic for a horror comic competition that the Townsville newspaper is throwing. And so they go to a hotel so that she can get in the mood and the vibe, and she's trying to write this comic. And so we have like kind of three horror stories even within the overarching story of the creepy stuff that's happening to them in the hotel. But then there's several different attempts that she's making at writing a scary story, and they have different art styles even within that. So we're able to get in a lot of different villains, a lot of different art styles, and then also a lot of homages to famous horror films. So there's a lot of not quite Easter eggs, but I guess jack-o'-lanterns like in there of things that visually, sometimes it'll just be visually, sometimes it's in the dialogue, but references to a lot of classic horror films. So it's a really, really fun story.
You have any specific villains who you say a lot of villains show up? Does any specific villain take the spotlight?
Yes, but that's a
spoilery.
surprise, so I won't say. But I will
Spoiler.
say, one of my personal favorites, so I'll give one spoiler, which is one of my personal favorites is in one of the times that Buttercup tries to write her story. It goes into a really hyper realistic style. So Kat draws the girls and their bodies, but as if, hyper realism. So
They're scary.
think no fingers, think those oversized eyeballs. And then Mojo Jojo is also done hyper realistic, and it's great. It's really creepy. It's some of my favorite pages in the comic. It's really fun.
They're very scary when they're 3D.
Yeah.
With like rendering?
Yes.
Like fully
rendered.
So there's a couple pages in there that are like that. It's great.
They catch the light.
But you don't change them to be more realistic. They're just rendered realistically.
Rendered realistically.
Yeah. So like their body, all those proportions that are so fun in the cartoon, but it would be very creepy if you met a person like that.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So they walk on tippy toes, and
Mhm.
that's amazing. I cannot wait to see that. That very specifically sounds very like it appeals to my sense of love of comics in general, and the way that styles can shift.
It's very magic, like the Anthony Hopkins movie Magic with the ventriloquist puppet. That's what it made me think of when I finished.
I'm gonna ask you, Kat, was that hard to do?
Mojo Jojo was not, but rendering the girls was, yeah, it was a little difficult to make. So I had to really figure out where the light is going to hit them and what it's going to do when it hits them, because they're very flat normally. So yeah, it was really creepy.
Do you turn them, so for example, their heads, for example, do you turn them into spheres, or are they just still a flat head? Oh, okay, so they're spheres.
They're spheres, as well as their arms are spheres.
I'm trying to imagine it.
Cylinders,
it's creeping me out too.
Yeah.
Just imagining it. So that's pretty cool. Is it difficult can you talk to me about the particular challenges of writing a comic or making a comic that is based on a very, very dynamically moving cartoon?
Well, that's the fun. The first thing that I did was go back and rewatch some episodes so that I could get in the headspace of it. But yeah, I mean, it's fun to get in the world. And then with something like this, because it's a Halloween special. So we get to, we can kind of play with things a little bit. So it's like very much in the world of the comic, but then we had a little bit of room to be more creative than we would have been if it was a typical everyday kind of Powerpuff story, right? Getting to do this particular Halloween where our particular holiday where things can get a little magical and a little spooky gave us a little more creative freedom.
What about you, Kat? Like in terms of motion and movement, translating it into the comics page.
Well, I mean, translating them into the comics page is not much different than putting them in like a cartoon. It's just a lot less drawing. You know, for me though, personally, it's not a particular style that I normally work in. So that part for me was very challenging because I don't normally work that way at all, in that style at all.
How long did it take you to get used to the Powerpuff style?
Well, luckily I had done some Darkwing Duck covers, so I loosened up a little with that. But yeah, like Darkwing, I had to sit and practice, the circles on their heads multiple times to make sure I get it right. And I tried to stick to, obviously the animation is there that I can, reference and everything, but it was just really challenging for me not to over render every page.
So when you started rendering them in a realistic style, was that actually a break for you?
Yes. Yes, it was. I really had fun on those pages.
Who were you channeling in terms of the realistic style, let's say?
I don't know that I particularly channeled.
Okay.
I don't think I channeled anyone.
Probably yourself.
Myself.
I mean, because her style naturally is so realistic that was like when I was writing it, that was the fun thing about knowing that we were going to be a team on this is, writing to my artist strengths is part of the reason that I came up with that idea was because I knew that's the style that Kat mainly works in, so that it would be something that would play to her strengths and that it would come out really fun and really creepy because it's a style that she would gravitate toward anyway. So that was, me cheating a little bit and knowing my artist well.
Amanda, how do you keep the girls' voices separate and distinct? Like what defines each of them for you?
I mean, that's so easy with these characters because they are so their voices are so well defined in the show that that to me is really easy because it is, you really do have such strong contrasting characters, which is part of what makes their dynamic so fun, right? Buttercup is always going to be tough and ready to fight and wanting to kind of take the violent route out of any situation, and Bubbles is always going to be wanting to find like the fun and the playfulness and the loving of any situation. And then you have Blossom, who I think is the more level-headed, more practical, more like, I'm going to have a plan. I'm going to tell everybody what to do. It might be a little bossy, but I'm probably right. And so when you've got those clearly defined dynamics that you can play with, it makes it easy to give them conflict with each other, teamwork, with each other as well. And then the villains are all such great villains. I mean, it's just such a fun gallery to even play with and pick out things from.
When you talk about the girls having such distinct voices, it's true that they have such distinct voices in terms of personality, but they also have really distinct literal voices.
Yes. Yes.
So when you're writing their dialogue, do you find yourself having to kind of say it out loud in order to kind of get their cadence, or?
Not necessarily out loud, but I do, I hear it in their voices in my head while I'm writing it. It's very much those voices that I hear. And I do tend to read my comics out loud before I'm finished with it. Like I'll write a pass and then I read it out loud because I find that I catch things, especially in dialogue, differently. When you're reading it, you kind of fill in the blanks in your head, but sometimes when you say it, you're like, oh, that sounds weird when someone says it out loud. So like, I do always kind of read over things anyway, just to make sure it makes sense. But I definitely heard their voices in my head as I was writing.
Amanda, I'm very curious. When you're writing the villains, now we're talking about the villains. Um, is there anything are they as distinct to you as the girls are?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the Mojo Jojo is the most fun to write villain-wise. It's something that I discovered in this because he does kind of over-explain everything and really pontificates. And I found that it was so much fun to write his cadence and so much fun to find the most long-winded, over-explanatory way to say something. And it's just really funny and fun to write in his voice. So I fell in love with writing him particularly and him. I love him as well, but yeah, all the villains are really cool and distinctive and have really fun voices. So it's a blast.
I love how you were saying that saying who the villains were is going to be a spoiler, but you have no problem saying that Mojo Jojo is going to be in it because I think everybody who's going to be buying this comic knows that Mojo
Jojo is going to be in it. Yeah, it would be really disappointing if he wasn't.
Yeah. I would have been disappointed that I didn't get to draw him.
Was he your favorite villain to draw?
Yeah, to draw, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So like visually too, he's got the most appeal.
He was,
yeah. I think he's everyone's favorite.
I think so too.
He's a monkey with 2 brains and a cape. How do you fit all of his dialogue into each panel?
So that is that's the thing.
Really
it's like
big panels.
It's the balance, but you're right. In comics versus if I was writing for the actual show, I did have to think about how to make him as long-winded as possible, but then also how to break it up. Either how to break it up into multiple panels where, he's doing his monologue, but we're going to see several things, or going, okay, what's the most long-winded, but still not that long-winded way to say something. It is in comics in particular, he does pose a creative challenge.
Actually, his pages are a trifold fold out.
I want to mention to our viewers that the Powerpuff Girls Halloween Special, the final order cutoff is this weekend. So you got all weekend to order it. In fact, I believe in some places like the Philippines, you can actually order it now. Right. Kat, you mentioned earlier that you drew Darkwing Duck in that gave you some preparation for the Powerpuff Girls. I am also a big Duck fan, and I'm just very curious to know, are the ducks harder to draw than the girls, or?
Yes.
Is it the body shape?
It's something? The bill. Getting that perfect
little
swoop on the front of the bill and not making it too long. It's very tricky.
And like every single duck has a different sized bill, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So not a lot of room for error there. Right. Is there a lot of room for error on the Powerpuff Girls?
Sorry?
Is there room for error on the Powerpuff Girls? They seem so minimal that I feel like if you make a mistake, it's so easy to spot.
Yes. Yeah, if you make a mistake, it is very easy to spot. So I tried really hard not to make mistakes.
That's well, I'm looking at the covers.
Their proportions are surprisingly difficult because their heads are so large. Yeah. And their arms can only go certain ways. And you have to make sure their limbs have weight to them. It's really, and they can't grab something, like their hand can't wrap around something. It has to be flat.
But somehow they're able to grip something just by touching it, right?
I'm guessing sticky palms, maybe. I don't know.
Magic.
The Powerpuff Girls, when I was watching it in high school, was a very fun cartoon. But I think one of the reasons that it cut across multiple age groups even back then was because children could enjoy it, but it also had a lot of innuendo and dirty jokes. So does that work? Does that work in here, or are you leaving that in? Not here.
Well, I think most of the innuendo in this particular story is more like Halloween film, horror film innuendo. Like it's more like innuendo for people that are fans of the horror world, just because that's like doing all the Halloween stuff. So that was kind of really more where it lived in this particular story.
Yeah.
Okay. And I assume because you mentioned him earlier, him will also be showing up.
Him does appear. For
Okay.
sure.
Because I was gonna say there is one Powerpuff Girls villain who is very apt for a Halloween special. And it is in fact him.
Mhm.
Do you think that is it a little tricky to write him considering a lot of we talk about people banning books when religion shows up and stuff. Like, do you think it is a little tricky to write him?
I mean, not for this. I didn't have any trouble with it, and not for this particular story because I knew so specifically what I wanted to do with him, and it worked so well. So I just wrote him the way that he fit into the story and the way that he is, and it works, I think.
Does the professor take a role in this comic?
Yes, the professor's not in it much, but he does appear.
Okay. Is there anything?
It's not a professor heavy comic.
Would you say it's Buttercup heavy? Because you talked about Buttercup being.
It is, yeah, I would say that Buttercup is probably our protagonist of the three girls in this one. I mean, they're all obviously major players in the story, but I would say this particular story is a Buttercup story.
And I might have missed this earlier, but how many stories are there in the book?
So it's one story for this Halloween special, but because Buttercup is trying her hand at writing some comics, there's kind of three stories within that story.
So it's one big story plus three stories. So for the price of one comic, everyone.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Including hyper realistic Powerpuff Girls.
I mean, right?
Yeah, we wanted to make it as simple as possible.
I'm so glad that the Powerpuff Girls are still alive and well in the year
Me
2024. And I'm so glad that the two of you are doing this comic. Is there anything else about the Powerpuff Girls Halloween special that you would like to disclose or tell people?
I think that's pretty much everything for that one.
Yeah, without spoiling it.
Yeah.
Okay. My last question is, what is next for the two of you?
I mean, we have a bunch of stuff. We've got in the Halloween comics vein, we have a new horror story in John Carpenter's Tales for Halloween Night, Volume 10. And we're doing a signing with John Carpenter and Sandy King Carpenter and several other of the artists and writers from that book at Golden Apple Comics here in Los Angeles on October 26th. And
it's on sale October 12th.
And so that book is coming out or is out right now.
No, it comes out on like the 8th, I believe.
Okay.
6th of the 8th.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I just had a Rocket and Groot Spooky Stories graphic novel that came out last week. And I have a new Batman and Scooby-Doo Mysteries that is out this week. And I've got an Archie comic coming up in like a month, and then a new Teen Titans Go graphic novel in January.
Yeah, who knew that Batman and Scooby-Doo would become
a major
thing,
right?
That's awesome.
It's so fun.
Cool.
In addition to the Tales for Halloween Night, I also have another book with John Carpenter and Sandy Carpenter that is a collection of stories that Frank Thierry and I have done together, plus 2 new stories. That book also comes out next week. And then the DC Horror Annual, I have a story in that that comes out in October as well. I'm doing some covers for Terminator. Those are coming out, I think, starting in October, and then throughout, however long the run goes.
That's awesome.
And I'm also doing more Powerpuff covers, so I've got those coming out too.
You'll get more practice.
And I'm also working on volume 2 of a book that Amanda and I are doing together with Sandy Carpenter called Death Mask. I'm working on volume 2 of that right now.
Is it such an eclectic group for you, Kat?
We are.
Thank you so much. This was a really cool conversation. I'm so glad that the Powerpuff Girls. I can't wait to read this comic, if only to see hyper realistic Powerpuff Girls.
I mean, honestly, if for nothing else.
That's worth the ticket alone.
Thank you so much. Final order cutoff is today. The actual comic is available on October 23rd. Okay. Thank you so much. That was
Awesome. Thank you.
nice, sweet conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's already up on YouTube, so it can be shared.